It is now my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, the Commander of the 7th Coast Guard District, Rear Admiral Scott Buschman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and happy birthday to you, too. Today is his birthday, so. Good afternoon. It is a privilege to be here to honor those who served before us. I'd like to thank Mayor Regalado, Representative Friesen, the distinguished guests on the stage with me, the distinguished guests in the audience, the organizers of the event, and for all of you for being here today. Today is about history. Today is about remembering and honoring those among us who helped create this history. We take a few minutes out of our busy days to honor these times. And we take a few minutes or a few hours out of our day, what we find is we get a lot more out of it than we put into it. Just last year marked the 70th anniversary of D-Day. I've only been here about 2 weeks ago, and a year ago I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. And I had the opportunity to attend a memorial ceremony at a U.S. Navy amphibious base. And during the ceremony, I sat next to some of the soldiers that parachuted into Normandy and hear their stories firsthand. These are moments and memories I will keep with me forever. And later that same day, I was able to visit a Coast Guard veteran and his family who served on a Coast Guard landing craft that shuttled troops to the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. The ship's third landing attempt, it struck a submerged mine, and he gallantly fought the fire to ensure the remaining troops were unloaded onto the beach before the order was given to abandon ship. During my visit, he and his family thanked me profusely for taking the time out of my busy schedule to visit him. I found that very ironic because I was there to thank him, and I was not looking for any thanks from him. He passed away a few weeks ago, so I'm especially glad that I was able to take a few minutes of my day to honor his incredible service to our nation. So, as Dr. Atwood mentioned, I remember when I was growing up and learning about World War II, I mostly learned about what happened in Europe and what happened in the Pacific. So it's easy to forget how the Axis submarine activity was significantly impacted Allied shipping, including the waters of South Florida and the Caribbean. So it was right here in Miami that the United States Navy established a sub-chaser training center in the vicinity of what is now the American Airlines Arena. There's a pier next to the arena, which is the only one left from numerous piers that supported U.S. and Allied warships during World War II. The mission of this center was to train U.S. and Allied personnel to effectively expand anti-submarine warfare capabilities. In March of 1943, one such class graduated from the sub-chaser training center, which included members of the Cuban Navy. On May 13, 1943, two merchant vessels, the American vessel Nicoliner and the Cuban vessel Mombi, were torpedoed and sank in Caribbean waters. 2 days later, on May 15th, a United States Navy Kingfisher aircraft spotted a possible sub, dropped a smoke marker, and flew towards a nearby Allied convoy. The CS-13, a wooden-hulled subchaser, was part of the escort and directed to investigate. Using the tactics they learned here in Miami and at the sub-chasing training center, they sank what we now know was a German submarine U-176. The CS-13 was the only small vessel to sink an Axis submarine in the Western Hemisphere during World War II. And before becoming part of Cuban naval history, the CS-13 was in fact a part of the United States Coast Guard. It was the Coast Guard 83338, one of 12 Coast Guard cutters that was handed over to the Cuban Navy during World War II. This class of cutters were very capable 83-foot patrol boats built by Wheeler Shipyards in Brooklyn, New York. The Coast Guard purchased 240 of them and used them for decades after the war. 60 of them were shipped to Poole, England in the spring of 1944 and participated in the Normandy invasion as Rescue Flotilla 1, which deployed during the landings on D-Day as rescue vessels and were credited with saving the lives of 1,438 servicemen from the English Channel. 24 of these vessels were sent to the Pacific and served in Okinawa, the Marshall Islands, Saipan, and Guam, and other places. These vessels have an honored place in the history of our Coast Guard and of the Cuban Navy, And today, as Eric mentioned, Mr. Wes Wheeler and Jonathan Wheeler, great-grandsons of the founder of Wheeler Shipyards, are here with us, along with Eugene Wheeler and their families. Please stand so we can recognize you. And Wheeler Shipyard also built another famous vessel, and it was Ernest Hemingway's yacht Pilar, also built by Wheeler Shipyards. One of the pictures on display outside and in the program is a handover ceremony that took place in March 1943, right around when the CS-13 crew graduated from the Sub-Chasing Training Center, and less than 2 months before the sinking of U-176. In that ceremony, 10 Coast Guard cutters, including the A3338, were given to the Cuban Navy under the Lend-Lease program. On that day, Commodore Julio Arguelles of the Cuban Navy, who accepted the vessel, simply promised, "We'll use them well." He lived up to that promise. Standing next to Commodore Arguelles on that day 72 years ago was Captain Whitbeck, the first ever Coast Guard 7th District Commander. And I am the 33rd Coast Guard 7th District Commander. So over 72 years later, I now am able to take part in honoring that history and the history that many of your family members, of some of you in this very room, helped to write. Today, your Coast Guard is in the process of replacing our aging cutters, including our patrol boats that patrol our waters right here and keep our threats offshore. As part of this recapitalization effort, we built 58 new fast response cutters to replace our patrol boat fleet. The first 6 are already here in Miami. The second 6 are in Key West, and they're currently patrolling the waters off of Florida and the Caribbean. So while today's threats to our security are different and include things such as terrorism and narcotic smuggling by transnational criminal organizations that destabilize the very hemisphere in which we live, know that your Coast Guard is standing the watch. Thank you all for being here. Your presence helps us preserve the legacy of all who served in the Second World War. It is an honor to be here with all of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral.